If you had one wish, what would it be? It's a question as old as time. Human beings have always entertained the idea of jinns and genies. The genie comes from Islamic culture, starting with a supernatural spirit named Iblis. This spirit, old as time, is claimed to have been the devil that tempted Adam and Eve, expelling them from the Garden of Eden. Traditions have since spread to Muslim culture, the details intertwining with legends of modern-day interactions between humans and the unknown. But what if your wish wasn't tangible, physical? Well, surely you've wished for a power, like the ability to read minds. Maybe you've always wanted to play piano, but you just don't have time to learn. Perhaps you just want that someone special to love you back. Or maybe you wish that your special someone would return.
Growing more.
Adrian's parents aren't very kind to her. They're constantly yelling at her and arguing with each other, but what's worse, they don't really pay any attention at all. That much the school counselor can tell when they take on Adrian's case. Our unnamed counselor is among one of the many school staff who is surprised at Adrian's emotional outbursts as of late. I excused Adrian during music class today and spoke with her about her recent string of demerits. It was our first time meeting outside of our quarterly evaluations, and I believe it went well. I can certainly understand Mrs. Richardson's classroom observations concerning Adrian's emotional state. She was, of course, intensely shy when we first met. As I understand it, she's similarly withdrawn in her classroom activities and only speaks or acts when she absolutely must. Some things she simply will not do. Instead of participating in mandatory group activities, she will sit alone and accept that she will receive a demerit. Before the meeting, I read Mrs. Richardson's parent-teacher report, which allowed me to estimate some about Adrian's home life. The parents are well educated and come from a prestigious background, but they lack time to properly nurture Adrienne. She is often alone, and when she is not, the parents seem to not understand the importance of warmth and affirmation when dealing with someone so young. Having two parents of this reserved and icy temperament exacts an inhibition in a child. The child's imagination is subdued, but only ostensibly, where it eventually finds its way into regular life. I surmised that I would be able to reach out to Adrienne by way of make-believe. The counselor, with high hopes of helping Adrienne adjust to her new life, decides to connect with her through a sense of imagination. By entertaining her stories, the counselor aims to ascertain the problem and find its solution, or at the very least, to listen to the child when nobody else will. By indulging in her fantasies and stories, I was able to glean more of an understanding of Adrienne's anxiety surrounding her home and parents, they say. Our eager counselor asks a few questions and finds out that the withdrawn Adrienne has been suffering at her new home. They are surprised, however, to hear the girl say that she likes the basement best of all. "There's lots of cool stuff down there," she says, her voice shaking. "That's not why they sent me down there, though." Adrienne's parents, too distracted with an argument to pay her any mind, tell her to go clean up downstairs. Dejectedly, she goes to the basement, but it is here where the story starts. Adrienne explains upon her exile, she discovered a large, bristled creature lying just outside of the vent underneath some black garbage bags. Upon her discovery of it, at her gaze, it grew or extended its shaggy-haired self. "Hair like the fur of a dog?" I offered. "No," she said, "not like the fur of a dog or the hair on her head." "A bristle?" I offered. "Yes," she said. Adrienne's fear grows into curiosity and she begins to explore further. Our counselor simply listens, intent on drawing connections to real life from her tale. We're now in Adrienne's point of view, where we are able to explore the dark basement before us. There are piles of trash in every corner, old file cabinets and other furniture soaked with rot in the blackness, and a corner to the left we are unable to explore quite yet. Hidden behind a panel on the wall in the right corner of the basement is a closet filled with humanoid plastic figures and a doll with skin like the fuzz from pipe cleaners. Under piles of trash we can find Eurasian steppe shamanism and the fusiform gyrus, an interdisciplinary study in sympathetic magic by one Jacob Hart. We can also collect a photo of our late grandfather titled Mr. PhD and a bottle of craft glue. Still suspended in disbelief, our counselor asks Adrienne what she did with these materials. "Grow, Grandpa," she explained plainly, and then, without missing a beat, she continued on with her story. Feeling this was a potent symbol, I stopped her again to ask what she meant. Somewhat puzzled, I did not understand immediately. She explained slowly. Grandpa lives in the cage in the other room, the cage behind the door. They grew people in the cage. Back in Adrian's eyes, we can find several lap notes taped to the doors and a hastily written note scrawled on lined paper. I have repeatedly called your homes to no avail, and so I am forced to leave this here for you all. I found William sitting in the corner of the enclosure area, seeming severely concussed. Whiskers was gone, in none of its usual hiding places. I immediately suspected the worst. The project thus must be suspended for now. I am leaving up the usual mirrored coverings we use to keep the anthropoidic void sealed. I have done my best to lock up everything on such short notice. It is a hasty fix, but it will require some time to find a more permanent remedy. I am honestly hoping you do not find this note, as I intend to lock the house down too. I intend to race off to you to retrieve your lockbox keys. Do not worry about William's key. It and the rest of his equipment is almost certainly deep within Whiskers now. I pray you do not enter this room. No matter how I may appear, William cannot be helped, and is only being kept alive as a means of continuing predation on the rest of us. I will say once again, no matter what state you may encounter William in, he cannot be helped. I have sympathy for the young man, I truly do, but I found on his person several photos of his late sister, which would imply certain risks he knew he was taking. Our extant research materials have now become possible liabilities, either criminal or professional in nature, so I have stashed them away. I believe I let you all know how I might do this if we were ever to experience an event such as this one. I hope you all remember what I told you. So long then, Dr. H. In the adjoining room can be found a hidden cage lined with mirrors running the length of the floor to the ceiling. It was here that she combined the ingredients she'd collected and wished with all her might. Guided by the dissertation written by her grandfather, Adrienne put the doll in the cage and prayed for her grandfather to return and for her parents to stop being so mean. Thus began the second week of Adrian's counsel. On the screen flashes the words wish and shall, two things we've learned that can be brought up with Grandpa when he emerges. And so begins week 2. I met again with Adrienne in order to address her emotional outbursts in the few weeks. It's our second time meeting, and while it is standard practice to have multiple sessions with a troubled student, as I assemble a report for the counseling department, I could not help but think, as we sat down in my office, that Adrienne already seemed to show a remarkable change in self-esteem and confidence, and perhaps mine, Mrs. Richardson's estimation of her as a emotionally disturbed child was erroneous. The paralyzing shyness and withdrawn attitude Adrienne possessed last week was not entirely diminished, but she seemed to hold herself differently this week. However, this only lasted as long as our conversation pertained to initial introductory pleasantries. When I began once again asking about her parents, her feelings regarding her new school and her new home, she quickly lost what new confidence she had gathered up and withdrew again into herself. So once again, I partook in some collaborative make-believe, but this time I was aided by the fact that I had managed to do some research into Adrienne's grandfather, and I had some insight into what she might actually be finding in the basement. Now, this may be overstepping my bounds as a school counseling caseworker, but this was all in the service of making Adrienne comfortable and happy in this learning environment. Our school counselor digs into the past of Adrienne's grandpa to find out that he was, educationally, a very impressive man with a sprawling knowledge of the sciences that are too dizzying to properly dissect. With that in mind, our counselor asks if Adrienne's grandfather was a smart man, a topic that could allow her to reflect fondly of his time on Earth. Oddly, Adrienne responds simply that he is not intelligent enough to speak just yet, as he is still growing. She points out that she keeps food for him in her lunchbox, noting that he's successfully grown a mouth on the outside of his skin or shell, which she can toss him food in from the cage bars. The counselor, perplexed, invites the child to tell him more. When I look at him, she continued, when I think about him, he grows and moves. It's like he's growing for me. He's growing bigger now, bigger every day. It is here where growing my grandpa really begins, and this is also the most crucial time to get the best ending for Adrienne. In this case, however, we're going to focus on the bad ending first, since that is the one that is most difficult to obtain, and the one I got 3 times before I gave up. I looked it up. I had to. We're given the ability to take care of Grandpa via conversation and feeding. We can observe his conditions and see what food he prefers best, and then feed him accordingly. But Grandpa will also accept foods that aren't edible, like yummy insulation from the wall and scrumptious batteries. Most of growing my grandpa is exploring and reading documents. In fact, about 60% of the game is contingent on reading and understanding the creature before you. Without knowledge of Grandpa's diet, origin, and all-around lore, there's no way to satisfy the contract that you've unwittingly signed. I think it would significantly devalue the experience to recite these documents to you directly, and it would also make this video 2 hours long, so I'll paraphrase the organism that is Grandpa as best as I can before we launch back into the story of Adrienne and how we can help her. So, as you've probably guessed, Grandpa is not actually Adrienne's grandfather, but something else entirely. The note scrawled on the door to the room that holds his cell is a warning, not an invite, after all. A handful of scientists and several grad students from the local university had taken on a project whose goal was to decipher the origins and compositions of a creature known as whiskers, an urchin-like organism called the Heaven of Needles that is rumored to grant the wishes of human beings and cure certain cases of prosopagnosia, or face blindness. Despite several warnings from the village from which Whiskers was adopted, these researchers acquired a sample of the creature and began to perform tests on it. It is not clear how these scientists acquired a sample of Whiskers. Either they stole it from the steppe people in the mountains from where it originated, or otherwise acquired a sample through more clandestine means.
I'll steal it! No one will ever know! No one will ever know! No one will ever know! No one will ever know!
The project involves growing Whiskers through the same ritual that Adrienne used, by combining a shell with a picture and some craft glue, and then by not allowing the propagation or piece of Whiskers to grow beyond 4 weeks. Any growth beyond this point could result in severe consequences. This incredibly dangerous assignment does not take place on any base or in a traditional lab setting, but rather in the basement of the Hart family home, which is enough cause for concern, but I digress. This organism, aptly named Whiskers, is kept in an anthropoidic vacuum, which in this case is a floor-to-ceiling cage lined with mirrors and covered in tarp. It's a specialist in aggressive mimicry, in that it is able to mimic the face and tone of voice of its potential victim. It can be taught words, and eventually full sentences as a human, and read the inner thoughts of other things, at many points mimicking Dr. Hart and William, called the desirous yield. It has been discovered that this desirous yield is not a mere case of mimicry, but instead a projection of the thoughts of another person. Whiskers can not only read faces and mimic appearance, but readings would strongly suggest that he is able to read minds of the scientists and mimic a particular projected image. When presented with the human subject in an adjacent sealed test chamber, who was asked to picture an image of Jesus Christ, for example, Whiskers began to form the crude composition of a Nazarene in its spines. When presented with the image of a rabbit, Whiskers attempts to mimic a rabbit. That is to say, when Whiskers is removed from dormancy and replicates a rabbit's morphology, it is not seen from the rabbit's eyes, nor smelling from the rabbit's nose, but pretending that it does, and doing a very good job of it. In order to prevent instances of aggressive mimicry, scientists would conduct independent tests on the creature wearing mirror masks and mirror suits when interacting with it. One of the many issues with the project lies in the fact that Whiskers has a strong capability to remember things between growth cycles. Each bundle of cells swells faster than the last propagation, but this does not sway Hart or his colleagues. The incredibly fast-moving growth system of this predator is more a subject of fascination to them than one of contention. With all of this in mind, we can move on to what happened in the lab and why it's still here after all this time, poorly covered by educational posters and hastily scrawled notes. Jacob Hart, the lead scientist in charge of the project, was paired with his colleague as a co-researcher whom we only know as William, when he suddenly died in a car accident on his way back from the property. This was most likely the day that the entity known as Whiskers escaped its cage through a vent in the ceiling, possessed William's body, used it as a shell by fitting itself into him, and left the remains in his secret location in the basement. But why? Well, Whiskers is essentially a demon that grants wishes on the basis of a fulfilled contract. It can grant any wish, it seems, including Adrienne's wish for her parents to love her. 3 pieces are needed in order to complete this contract: blood, flesh, and a token, or a symbol of the desired wish. In this case, a picture of the individual connected to a shell, which can be a paper doll, a mannequin, or the like. This shell will serve as the body of the desired party. If one or more pieces is missing from this deal, the wish cannot be granted. Whiskers will then prey upon a victim and use their covering of skin to manipulate others and eventually hop to a more suitable host, doing so until it becomes the most successful predator in the environment. This is a real-life process called is ed. I can't pronounce. I will figure this out. Ecdysis. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. This is a real-life process called ecdysis, in which a creature called an arthropod with inelastic skin sheds parts of its body so that it can continue to grow. This is because the skin on their bodies hardens at one point or another, which can be very dangerous for the organism and prevent its growth. The old hardened skin, called the Gřejᵒʟ, splits open to reveal the soft tissue beneath, which will then need to be covered with a shell for protection. Anyway, William died while trying to revive his late sister, either because Whiskers decided it was too hungry to fulfill a contract, or because William did complete it in the first place. There's a possibility that it fed off William's fear and killed him based on the expectation that it was to do so in the event of direct contact, which in and of itself is a disturbing thought. So, with all the lore out of the way, we can create a full understanding of Adrian's story through the gameplay elements. If 60% of the story is gleaned from collecting documents and reading them carefully, then the remaining 40% is obtained from finding key items, which are vocabulary cards and food for Grandpa. The more words we teach him, the more we can converse with him later using these keywords and understand his opinions on the state of being, but more on that later. There are 3 kinds of food to find: anthropoids, fruit and veggies, and inedibles. The latter will cause Grandpa to throw up key items: a key to the safe, scissors, and a flashlight, in that order. Opening the lockbox with the key will grant us a picture of our mother as a young girl. The other objects inside are Hart's wallet and pocket watch, timeless relics most likely hidden from Whiskers in order to prevent an aggressive mimicry event. The scissors can be used to cut open these little bulbous growths found around the basement, filled with what is only described as ambient thoughts of Whiskers left to die in the womb of sorts. These unspeakable horrors are called anthropoids, and feeding them to Whiskers will allow his proboscis to come out, one of the 3 pieces of the contract that Adrian is trapped in. This proboscis allows him to feast on blood, and it allows him to accept tokens, which will appear as a notification down at the bottom of the hub. Yeah, look at that. It's right there. Grandpa's accepting tokens. Yippee! Anyways, if you give Grandpa meat, blood, and the token of only your father before ending the week, our impressionable young Adrienne will happily report back to a counselor with newfound happiness. Our counselor's evaluation is quickly coming to a close, which they reflect upon fondly but with some reservations. The time I have to spend compiling an evaluation on Adrienne is almost up, and I still can't say what to make of her changes in mood. It is, of course, the case that children of Adrian's age are nowhere near finished learning and growing. I may have to simply be happy that Adrian was able to improve her attitude. However, something in the odd and occasionally grotesque stories she continues to bring up to me still strike me as meaningful. How has your week been, Adrian? Grandpa's almost ready. He's almost finished. Well, sort of. Ah. He's almost as big as his shell now. He has a face and he can talk pretty well, and almost has legs. I see. This is your last week to complete Whiskers' contract, which requires all of the pieces. If you fail to acquire all the elements despite feeding and teaching Whiskers, there will be consequences. Thusly, the last week of Adrian's counsel concludes. Who could that be? Come in. Ah, Adrian, good to see you. Aren't you a little early? No matter, I suppose I have some time now. How have you been? How's your grandpa doing? That's why I wanted to talk to you. Something happened. Oh, what happened? Nothing bad, I hope. No, nothing bad, just different, I think. Maybe even good. Well, I'll tell you about it. Well, last night something woke me up. There was this noise at first. It was like it came from the walls. I could hear it from my bedroom. But there was something else. Something calling. I could hear it just barely. I was afraid somehow Grandpa hurt himself. I had to go find out. I went downstairs, and the vent, the place where I first found Grandpa, or what I grew him with, it was open. Do you remember how I told you about the vent in the ceiling behind the bars? I was thinking he had climbed up into it. He had gotten so big he could have done that. Maybe he had gotten trapped somehow in the vent. When I got inside, I heard the calling again more clearly this time. Grandpa was definitely in the vent somewhere. I could feel him hearing my thoughts. got that weird feeling, a sense in the air. I had to go forward. As I moved in closer, the vent had stuff in it, the kind of slimy, hairy stuff Grandpa would leave around a lot. Something was close, but it wasn't Grandpa. It looked like maybe he had made it, though. It was slumped in the corner, had a weird mouth and its lungs on the outside, and drew in just enough air to call out, and then it just stopped. Stopped breathing, and then something was hanging over me. And then I woke up in my bed. In your bed? Adrian, it sounds like it was just a quite dreadful dream. Are you all right, by the way? Your face is twitching, like you're about to have a violent sneeze. That is the failure of fulfillment ending. There is still hope, though, for Adrienne. Kinda. If you're forced to restart after an ending, you can usually get everything done within the 3rd or 4th week. Collecting all the documents is necessary if you want to look for food and vocabulary cards for Grandpa, both of which are essential to his growth. The key to getting the better ending is to feed Grandpa those yummy, inedible objects we talked about earlier. Each time we feed Grandpa insulation or batteries or shards of glass or a whole calculator or the mouth of a revolver, each time we conceal an edible object within a foodstuff and feed it to Grandpa, he will throw it up. Approaching his cage, you can search the pool of bile on the floor outside of his cage. The 3rd foul object you feed him will give you the flashlight, which can be used to further explore the left side of the basement, flooded in darkness. We'll find a very old classic book on alchemy, which suggests the ways that a magician can appeal to a particular demon. It warns that the desires of different demons cannot be denied. In other words, should a contract not be fulfilled with a particular demon in the way that it desires, it could result in the death of said magician. Of course, standard practice after pleasing the demon is to provide a token of the wish, in this case, a picture of the desire's yield, glued to its vessel. The contract must be completed in full, for if the magician errs and does not provide in the devil instruction and guidance, the devil, once subjured to do no harm upon the magician, will return to its devouring nature. We can also grab a paper doll, which can be glued to the picture of your mother and offered to Grandpa's proboscis. When he's satisfied with your fulfilled wish and accepts both of your tokens, you can leave Grandpa and end the final week. And here, I will show you what happens. I met with Adrienne one final time in order to see if I could not reach some sort of resolution regarding her emotional troubles. In these past few weeks, according to the reports of her teachers and peers, she has shown a remarkable transformation in conduct. I would also add my voice to this consensus. It seems as if in our time together, much has changed for the better. I am not suggesting our meetings were the sole source of her sea change. I think something has happened in her home life that has reoriented Adrienne completely. She seems to suggest as much, at least in her usually esoteric way, when we last spoke. Something tells me something may have changed with Grandpa. Yes, well, something did change. I will write down her words verbatim here. I went down the stairs like I always did, but I sort of felt like something was different. My parents weren't arguing, and I felt something had changed with Grandpa, too. There was a weird noise, but I wasn't afraid. think Grandpa had to leave, but before he left, he made my parents nice. He reached inside and changed them. That was my wish. Maybe even what I was growing wasn't really my grandpa. Grandpa left what I was growing behind. He is gone now. He moved quickly out to I don't know where, but I'll always love him. I dismissed Adrian soon after, letting her know it was a pleasure getting to know her. Despite my apprehensiveness about the speed of the turnaround she's made, I cannot see any reason why Adrian should be considered for further evaluation. And as a counselor for Adrian, let it be known that I believe she is of sound mental and emotional health. I am pleased to see things turn out this way, and if I may make a brief addendum. By happenstance, Mrs. Richardson bumped into the Hart family the other day while running an errand. She told me the parents were a little odd but very pleasant, and quite clearly they adored their child, and that she had never seen Adrian happier. Growing My Grandpa, like most games made by Yames, is a masterclass in atmosphere. What do I mean when I say that? Well, I should elaborate by saying that horror is not an easy genre. Anybody can string together crude elements of horror, that is, physical horror like character design or body horror or monster builds, a story, and some elements of gameplay. But real horror, severe horror, entails a feeling of discomfort, oftentimes long after the film is over. Growing My Grandpa includes a number of discomforting themes. There's the theme of child vulnerability, the uncanny concept of mortality, and mostly the idea that a creature like Whiskers is no more impossible than the man on the moon. In fact, it is these three concepts to me that make Growing My Grandpa such a wonderful horror game. For instance, the entirety of the story is told through the eyes of Adrian's counselor, who, with kindness in their heart, is only attempting to get through to the disturbed child. Unbeknownst to them, however, they are only encouraging the impressionable student to engage further with Whiskers. Although from the player's perspective we know these things to be true, the counselor does not. All the while they are rooting for the girl and hoping that her emotional instability can be eased, but ultimately Adrian is not listened to by any adults, not her parents, not the teachers, closely enough for any one person to actually believe what she is saying, until it's too late. The counselor does come pretty close, and for that I applaud them, and I think they should get a raise, but Adrian is still taken advantage of in either ending. Somebody's getting hollowed out and used as a puppet no matter what you do, people. But truthfully, it's a disturbing prospect that touches upon reality. There are countless abused children in the school system who can only communicate a fraction of their struggle, if at all. If the counselor hadn't been so adamant on helping Adrienne, it's likely that she would have stayed withdrawn and would have been further victimized by the adults in her life. Whiskers could be classified as having the working mind of an adult and then some. It's terrifying to think that it only takes a few moments alone with a monster like this before another life is taken. When I first read the documents on the door to Whiskers' cage, I knew immediately that some scientist dudes were pulling a Jurassic Park basement edition. They made 7 movies about why this is a bad idea. That is, playing God, messing around with mortality. Things that are dead should stay dead, in my opinion, but humans have always tampered with the model of human design. But hazy, you ask. If Hart and his team had successfully managed to contain and propagate Whiskers for the foreseeable future, huge advancements in science could have been made. An organism like this could change the world, could change everything. Scientific advancement? Ultimately, I believe the advanced nature of Whiskers' sentience and autonomy prevents that possibility. Despite the team's controlled experiments on Whiskers' metaphysical qualities, Whiskers is in control the entire time and is eager to show it. It survives solely off of preying upon other creatures more helpless than itself, gathering more information in order to multiply, and then dropping off pieces of ambient thought and pustules on the wall, like a spreading infection. It's the reason why Williams, a well-seasoned scientist on the project, was a victim, and why I feel that somehow Dr. Hart was a victim of Whiskers as well. I find it a strange coincidence that he died in a car accident, the same day that his co-researcher disappeared, but I digress. In regards to Whiskers' existence, I think it is very possible that something like this could really exist. Yames' art, animation, and storytelling makes this game feel incredibly real. Certain lesser important details are kept in the background so that the really important things like the nature of the beast and its proclivities can be understood as soon as they swell to dramatic heights. We know as much as the scientists, and the breadcrumbs they leave behind in their wake are infinitely fascinating. Drawers filled with masks that serve as empty shells for Whiskers, the box of personal items kept by Dr. Hart, pictures from the medical imaging device, which looks more like those from an MRI, and the other little details from the game all help contribute to this experience. It really does feel like picking up after a failed experiment, reading all of its notes, getting to know its researchers. And growing my grandpa's strongest element is probably Adrian's conversations with Grandpa. Grandpa, or Whiskers pretending to be Grandpa, rather, does an excellent job of making you feel present in the moment. Special. If you speak to him when his mouth and jaw is not quite fully formed, you can coax some words from his spirit, but it is in the last week when Grandpa's at his best, speaking to Adrian in a way that is sweet, but straightforward. For instance, Grandpa says, "You know I love you. I am for you whatever you want, and I love you just as much as you love me, but desperation and love is not enough. People deep down know that they can't get what they wish for without some transformation. There's something that sits at the root of everyone's soul that understands the separation between them and eternity. You may desire something, but you know you will not get it without some movement on your part. So it is not enough to just wish, which you know will not work. You just must wish and a little more to transform your intention into something that might fructify or for desire to become reality. What you are thinking and expecting of me is shaping what I'm saying, how I'm saying it. Do you understand?" So while Whiskers is manipulating the little girl, he's being very clear that her expectations of him to be good and sweet and nice are only being honored because that's the transactional nature of the contract. If Whiskers is a creature that manifests from the wishes of others, then it stands to reason that those same strong wishes are what shape its form. Because Adrian remembers her grandfather as a kind and sweet man, so Whiskers is kind, but he is not Grandpa. In fact, when asked about Grandpa, Whiskers talks about Hart from a third-person perspective, citing that he had seen him throw away a picture of his daughter's new boyfriend, which, for all we know, could have been the father of Adrienne. The girl, of course, ignores all of this, just as Williams was prepared to do, to see his sister again. These parts of the game, however, are the warmest, and they fill me with a sweet feeling like warm honey. The music ebbs and flows in tides, these hopeful, melancholy little synth notes floating over a din of echoes, and the garbled voice of Grandpa. As he explains that the Whiskers knitting his face together are hidden behind a shell made to look like a human, I couldn't help but think of my own family. No, seriously though, I can only imagine what kind of effect this might have on a child. In fact, much of the music is very intentional. It is emotional, direct. It can be grating and itchy or severe and cold. Exploring the laboratory in the later stages will grant you this lovely, curious tune that reminds me a lot of Pikmin 2's alien ambient tracks. Tracks like radiographs and trash piles plod mechanically through sound waves, creating a sterile, unforgiving atmosphere. Shh. And in the basement are serious, dramatic tones with a droning structure that demands concentration, reminiscent of the sci-fi horror classic Memories of Green, and also of ambient specialist Bola. Enclosure's alt mix, although not used in the game, is one of my favorite tracks, a muted splice between Massive Attack, Onetrix Point Never, and Shuttle 358. I am resisting the urge to make the comparison to Boards of Canada. I will not do that. Yames draws obvious influence from Silent Hill, but the soundtrack feels its own, dark and gritty, matching a scene without overpowering the game as a whole. Music is used as a tool to fill the space and create a sense of connection to the tasks being done, as well as to keep things somewhat interesting. Since we can see everything happening to Adrienne from her point of view, the silence between her and the counselor is that much louder during their sessions. I found myself relaxed but never bored during my time with Growing My Grandpa, much like other games I adore. These demented ambient tracks, which often border on evil, highlight the hilarity and absurdity of owning what is essentially a psychic, shape-shifting Tamagotchi that puts holes in people.
I'm gonna strangle your parents, okay? That's what's gonna happen to them. I'm gonna put my hands around their neck and strangle them!
Overall, I would say the music contributes greatly to the sense of wonder and awe within the game's story. which leads me to my final points. Just quickly, I'd like to mention where the horror in Growing My Grandpa comes from exactly, and then I'm going to splice this in and not complain about it. I'm talking to you, Editing Hazy. Earlier, I briefly touched on the ideas that are central to this game: mortality, child abuse, etc. I think any person could take a look at the game and see why it is, in fact, horror without even reading the story. But Growing My Grandpa is not merely a spooky story with body horrors. While that is Yame's specialty, of course, he is not limited to his grotesque, uncanny artwork. The real horror of the game lies in Yame's special perspective, the one of the player. I've seen games do this, in which the author places the player in a position that is opposite to the other characters, usually persons that meet their stories with incredulity or a blasé attitude. Protagonists are shunned, deemed mentally ill, and either later proved right or die from their discovery. It is often done in psychological horror to increase anxiety on behalf of the players, such as in Layers of Fear, Friend Beau, Sally Face, and Visage. It also strengthens the bond between the player and main character, making them feel more real. I would state that Growing My Grandpa has a unique mixture of first and third player perspectives, which alternate between the counselor and Adrienne. While the counselor tells their story from a personal point of view, they also witness the student tell her story, from which the player can see everything. We are an essential witness to Adrienne's experiences, living through her as she retells the tale of growing grandpa. Using children to propel this trope is common in horror media, as it is widely believed that children are able to see what most adults cannot. You see it in horror movies all the time, with a child sitting in the middle of the floor, drawing a picture, and they say, "Look, Mommy, I drew my friend." And their friend is Nails and Face Man, and their mom takes them to a counselor, and the counselor says the child is severely mentally disturbed, and then the counselor goes home, and now they can see Nails and Face Man, and yeah, that shit go crazy, y'all already know. But in Adrienne's case, although she is innocent, she is old enough to understand a great deal more than a toddler, and is definitely smarter than a lot of children, or so I gathered from her ability to read Hart's manuscript and follow its directions. While she doesn't explicitly say, "I completed a ritual to resurrect a demon," her actions are understood to be exactly that, fueled by the ignorance and hope of a child. This is where Yame's writing shines. It's not enough that the naive Adrienne says what she is doing, and that we can see it as well, but that her counselor does not really believe her. I mean, I feel they're certainly trying to pick up the pieces towards the end of the game, but it takes a long ass time before the counselor starts to understand that what Adrienne is saying is actually legit. By then, of course, it is too late, no matter what you do. Subversion of expectations is also another small strength in the game. We're forced into treating Grandpa like a pet. Therein, a twisted definition of the word is brought forward. Notifications appear at the bottom of the screen as if they're to be celebrated, like the announcement of Grandpa's proboscis, or the prompt, "Explore the basement," as if it's a perfectly safe and normal thing to do. By approaching Grandpa's growth this way, Yames forces the player to see the things the way Adrienne does. A fun activity closer to the raising of a pet than the molding of a slimy anthropoid clone of her grandfather. I might also add that the art in Growing My Grandpa is stunning. Grandpa himself, at around week 4, is a mass of pockmarked flesh sewn together and pushed outside of a fabric shell. While we speak to him, his hole-filled mass jerks and fidgets as needles are punched through the skin. In the cage, he can be seen sitting in a chair, a mass of hollow spines tasting the air like so many antennae. Whisker's ability to mimic human beings is not a new concept by any means, just like the illustrious predator or other disturbing entities found in sci-fi horror, but Whisker's level of intelligence is disturbing, to say the least. It speaks to Adrienne in the way that it wants her to hear, all while splicing bits of crucial information in the conversation. In a roundabout way, Whiskers tells Adrienne that he only loves her in the way she wants to be loved, and no more, without feeling or thought, but with careful calculation and air of necessity and duty. Like AI, Whiskers is incapable of true love, only of carefully copying the speech patterns and actions that a loved one would perform. And what of Adrienne's parents? Were they really made kind after all of this is over?
No.
Adrienne's parents may have been struggling through the beginnings of a divorce, a rift that began after the death of Dr. Jacob Hart, which rocked the family dynamic and caused tension in the new home. Hollowed out by Whisker's propagation, the creature is now deep within their skin, burrowing under the fingernails and ocular cavities of Adrienne's parents. Their personalities and sense of self has now been replaced with Whisker's propagations, surely to one day peel back their skin and hop into yet another body, either when Adrian sees fit or when the monster grows too big for its cage. I found growing my grandpa to be a fascinating, stunning experience, intelligently crafted and dripping with what many consider to be Cronenberg's touch. However, I might also draw influences to David Lynch. The washed-out colors and film grain a reflection of Eraserhead, and the overall weirdness and stilted narration easily comparable to Twin Peaks. And yet, Whiskers ultimately feels very real. The descriptions of its morphology, the disturbing blurbs about the boundaries it constantly crosses, all of it is so very convincing. It goes without saying that the conversations with Adrienne and Grandpa have elements of dialogue one would find in the voice of an older family member, something sentimental and nostalgic that cannot be replaced. It makes the story bite down harder than it should. I can't help but be haunted by this game and its participants, and some small part of me wonders if, out there, somewhere, there is someone that walks and talks like you and I, but is not human. Of course, I could still speak more on games and its creations, but above all, I am looking forward to the future he will create, and all of its horrors. And that's about it. It has to be about it, because I can't keep making, it's too long now. The video's too long. I don't have time for this. I need to finish a commission and other things. There's so many things I need to do. Thank you for watching this video, as long as it was. And I'm looking forward to your comments and thoughts on growing my grandpa, stranger. Join the Patreon to see what I'm working on, if you're into that, and join my Twitch channel at Hazy-Eyed to see what art pieces or games are in progress. Please take care of yourself, drink water, and as always, stay tuned. Goodbye, stranger.